afternoon, everyone, and welcome. I would like to thank you for joining us today for our Sounds of Religion discussion with Dr. Amy DeRogatis and Dr. Isaac Weiner. My name is Carly Lizay, and I will be moderating today's discussion. I am currently a senior here at MSU, interning for the College of Arts and Letters Development Department and studying English and Communications. So before we begin our discussion, for those of you who are new to Zoom, I would like to direct you to the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. You may use this Q&A button to submit any questions that you have during any point in the webinar, and we will keep track of your questions and be sure to address them to our speakers here today after their presentation. I would also like to let you know that this webinar is being recorded and will be posted on our YouTube channel within the next few days for those who could not make it or if you would like to watch it at your leisure. So the only faces that will be shown today and on the recorded version are those of the presenters, so you do not have to worry about your camera or microphone today. I would now like to give a warm introduction to our speakers for today. Dr. Amy DeRogatis is a professor of religion and American culture in the Department of Religious Studies here at MSU. She is the recipient of the 2020 William J. Beale Outstanding Faculty Award, and her most recent book is Saving Sex, Sexuality and Salvation in American I'm so sorry. I apologize.
Evangelicalism.
Evangelicalism.
All good. Yeah.
She is co-director with Professor Weiner on the American Religious Sounds Project. Dr. Isaac Weiner is Associate Professor of Comparative Studies and Associate Director of the Center for Study of Religion at The Ohio State University. He is the author of Religion Out Loud, Religious Sound, Public Space, and American Pluralism, and co-director with Professor DeRogatis of the American Religious Sounds Project. Dr. DeRogatis and Dr. Weiner, I would now like to give you the floor.
Well, thank you so much, Carly, and thank you to everyone who is here today. It is such a delight for both of us to have a chance to talk with you about our project. The sounds that you heard at the beginning while you were logging in is a collage of sounds that have been collected by our research team and put together, edited and produced by our multimedia producer, Lauren Pond. So we wanted to talk a little bit with you today about a project, and I think we'll just start by telling you about the history and goals of our project, and then also talk about a shift that we had to make when everything shut down in March with COVID-19. But to get us started, I just want to tell you a little bit about who we are and how we got involved in this project. So Isaac and I grew up in the exact same town outside of Boston, 10 years apart. We didn't know each other growing up. We went to rival high schools. And we both went to different colleges. Isaac went to Yale, I went to Oberlin College. And then eventually we both found ourselves at the same graduate program at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, again, 10 years apart. We are both have a specialty in religion in the United States. And we both finally ended up at Big Ten universities. So we have a background that has a lot in common, but we didn't really know each other, and except by reputation, until we started to collaborate on this project. And the way that we got started was that about 6 years ago, the Mellon Foundation had an initiative called Humanities Without Walls. And that initiative said that they wanted primarily Big Ten universities, humanities scholars, to figure out how they could collaborate together across universities on a joint project. And so Isaac was at Ohio State, and he had previously written a book called Religion Out Loud, and at his former institution had been experimenting with recording religious sounds and putting them on a digital map. So when he got to Ohio State and he heard about the Humanities Without Walls, and I heard about it, he put a message out and said, hey, who would like to do some kind of mapping of religious diversity through sound? And I responded to it and I said, let's give it a shot. So we brought together 2 teams, one at Michigan State University and one at Ohio State University, of faculty, undergraduates, graduate students, to work together in our own communities and then together to document religious diversity by creating unique field recordings and figuring out ways to organize that and to put it on a digital platform. So these teams work together, and we had some classes where we were doing the work in classes. We had some opportunities to bring in students as student workers, but over time, the project grew. And we got another grant from the Luce Foundation, and then a third grant, which is what we're working on now from the Luce Foundation. So it started off as a very small thing, and then it just grew and grew and grew, and here we are today. The central initiative of collaboration is one that we've held on to, that we are 2 institutions, faculty at 2 institutions and students and staff at 2 institutions that are working together and expanding and growing as we go. So Isaac, why don't you talk about the project goals?
Sure. So thank you so much for having me here and allowing a Buckeye to intrude upon Michigan State in this way. But as Amy said, really central to this project has been the collaboration between us and our institutions that have allowed this project to grow and develop in the ways that it has. Our project includes a number of initiatives, but over the last 6 years, we've really focused on 2 primary initiatives. One, as Amy said, we've organized teams of students and faculty and staff members who have gone out into surrounding communities around our institutions, primarily throughout Central Ohio and Central Michigan, to produce hundreds and hundreds of original audio field recordings documenting what religion sounds like across a wide range of spaces. It's a quirky project, we acknowledge. We don't usually think about religion, I think, in terms of its sounds. Very often, at least our students, we find that they come to class thinking about religion in terms of what people believe, that it's a matter of personal faith, or it's about doctrines and creeds, kind of creedal statements of a private relationship with God, or what somebody believes in their heart, perhaps. And for us, what sound has been really exciting is a way to center, when we talk about religion, center things like bodies and practices, what people do in their religious lives. It's been a way to center the different kinds of spaces where religion happens. So we go and we record sounds in places like churches or synagogues or mosques, but we also go outside of institutions to all the ways that sound spills into other parts of social life. So we've been to political protests and rallies, and arts festivals, and football games, and rodeos, and racetracks, and all of these kind of surprising spaces where religion might not have a durable, permanent presence, but we've been able to record surprising sonic eruptions of the ways that religious practice happens across a wide variety of places and spaces in our communities. We've been able to document a wide range of diversity across religious traditions in Michigan and Ohio, diversity across traditions, so Jews and Christians and Hindus and Muslims and Buddhists and many other traditions, diversity in sonic practices, silences and clapping and stomping and singing and shouting, not just kind of formal liturgy, but all sorts of different ways that religious people practice when they come together in different settings. And also what I think above all, what sound has allowed us to get at are notions of community and the different ways that people gather together in community. Sound is something that we all hear and that echoes, emanates from one source, and a group together hears and practices together. And so it both brings communities together, and we've been interested in the communal worship and communal practices of different religious traditions. And it also crosses communities. So when a church broadcasts its bells from a bell tower, or a mosque broadcasts the call to prayer outside of its mosque, non-Christians will hear the bells too, and non-Muslims will hear the call to prayer as well. And they'll respond to that in a whole wide range of ways. That's something that I wrote about in the book that Professor DeRogatis mentioned, but also really central to our project, this idea of the way that sound helps us think expansively about religious diversity in our communities, helps us tune into it in ways that we might not otherwise have, and to think about the ways that we respond to the sounds of religious diversity in throughout the Midwest, and especially in Ohio and Michigan. So we developed this archive over the last 6 years that now has hundreds and hundreds of recordings. And our next step was to figure out what to do with that. We wanted to share those recordings with broader audiences, and to use those recordings to invite the public to think in new ways about religion, and also especially to experience the diversity of their regions in the ways that we had. So I think many people living in Michigan and Ohio don't even recognize, perhaps at times, kind of the startling diversity of our communities. And we wanted to create a way to help bring that into people's homes and environments and computers. So we worked with a web development team based at Ohio State here in Columbus, and we developed a digital platform. You can visit our website at religioussounds.osu.edu. And I'm sorry that it's based at Ohio State and not Michigan State, but other than that, it's been a total 50-50 collaboration every step of the way. And on our website, we've created a number of different ways that you can explore our archive and interact with our materials. So there is one section of the website called Explore, where you can explore the archive in a number of different ways. You can simply look at a list of all of the different recordings we have, and you can listen to short clips of about 30 seconds to 3 minutes each. You can search through the archive according to a wide range of categories and criteria. So you can look for all of the recordings that have to do with Judaism or with Islam or with different forms of Christianity. You can search by sonic type, so you can search for drumming or silence or singing. You can search by space. You can listen to recordings that were produced outside or inside a house of worship, or in someone's home in domestic spaces. And there's also a mapping platform, so you can search by where the recording was produced. If you want to see all the recordings produced in East Lansing, you can go and zoom in on the map into East Lansing and see the different kinds of sites and spaces and recordings and explore our archive that way, kind of geographically. The other half of the website offers a gallery, a curated gallery that includes exhibits produced by members of our team that explore particular themes or communities that have emerged from our archive. And those are curated gallery exhibits that bring together sound with image and text to tell particular stories about communities or about themes that we have studied over the last several years. And it's a different way of exploring the material that we've gathered in our archive. If there are educators in this webinar, there are also teaching resources up on the website that offer lesson plans for secondary school teachers or for university educators to think about how they might use this website to teach about religious diversity in their classrooms. And then also a number of other documents on the website that dive deeper into the project goals and questions we often get. And you can learn more about the work that we do by visiting the website.
So a really important part for both of us has been providing research opportunities for students in our classes. And because the humanities is not, our courses generally aren't set up with labs or with lots of hands-on research generally, we have spent a lot of time thinking about how this project can allow our students to do something different. And so over the past 6 years, we have had classes where we've incorporated the project, but we've also hired students onto the project. As funding came in, we were able to hire research assistants. And this has become a really central part of this project. Students who work on our project get IRB approved, go through the IRB approval sort of workshop. So they learn about that. They learn how to use very sophisticated recording devices. They learn how to edit recordings. They learn about metadata and about how to think about categorizing the recordings that they've done in order for them to be useful and helpful on a digital platform. But even beyond sort of those skills that they come away with, they have the opportunity to be part of a research group and to see, from starting with research questions and then going through all of the sometimes tedious, sometimes exciting steps to the finished product of what it looks like on, in this case, a public-facing platform. The other thing that I think has been really important is this has been an opportunity for our students to take what they've learned in the classroom and then go see it in their own community, so that they're not just learning on the MSU campus or the OSU campus, but they are making that, you know, crossing that bridge and learning about the community that's around them and starting to forge relationships with people in the larger community. And I think that that's been really, really profound, both for the students and for the community members with whom they engage. So one of the things that has come out of this project has been unique research opportunities for primarily undergraduates. But having said that, our project was imagined as very much immersive in communities. So whether or not they're going into a religious community, or maybe walking around the MSU campus, or, you know, going down to downtown Lansing or wherever they were going to record, when the shutdown happened in March, that all stopped. So as you can imagine, having a community-based research project with humans interacting with other humans, we were not able to do any of that. It wasn't just that the students went home and all, it's that we had to stop that kind of research. So pretty early on, we had a team meeting where we thought about, well, what can we do to continue researching while the conditions that we were used to had quickly changed. And of course, you know, we weren't going to do anything that was unsafe or unwise or anything like that. And so happily, because our research is on a digital platform, we were able to pivot pretty quickly to start thinking about what it would be like to do recordings during the time of COVID. And as we were pivoting, so were religious communities. And what it was going to look like, what it was going to sound like, excuse me, when religious communities, people, groups started to practice or engage with each other on digital platforms. So what we did is in March of 2020, which seems like 100 years ago, but really wasn't even quite a year ago, we made a change and we decided that we were going to do something new, which is we were going to crowdsource our sounds. And we had never done that before. We had always been very, very concerned about quality control of our recordings and about making sure that we were having students and faculty researchers in communities in ways that were pretty controlled when possible. And we just decided to do something completely different. And we put out a call. And this is it. It's on our website. It's still open. And what we said is that we wanted to hear from anybody who was interested in recording the sounds of their own religious practice, the sounds of going to a live stream service, or going to a live stream workshop that's a religious workshop, whatever it was, their thoughts on religious sounds in a digital time, whatever they wanted to do, to just send it in with very few, a few descriptors that we asked them to put in. And we started collecting them. And what surprised us is that people responded. And to date, we have something like 140 submissions, maybe a little bit more, of people from all over the country, sending in all kinds of different recordings, from actual ritual practices to some people talking about what it sounds like to practice religion right now, to all kinds of different submissions. So what we're hoping to do with this crowdsourced submission process and collection is we're hoping that it's still open, but when we finally get to a point of closing, that we'll be able to have a really good archive of what religion sounded like during this pandemic time. And so that's where we are with it. And so what we wanted to do is we wanted to take some time right now to talk with you about some of our preliminary findings. So, as we've kind of been listening to these COVID recordings and thinking about how religion sounds the same and different on a digital platform during the pandemic, we have come up with some ideas about what it is we're hearing, and we wanted to share those with you.
Yeah, so as Amy said, we wanted to share a few examples of some of the themes that have emerged from the recordings we've received so far in response to our COVID-19 call. And it's been really interesting, I'll just say first. So one theme is something we describe as ritual failure. And what we mean by this is, as I'm sure you're all familiar with, many religious communities have made efforts over this time to neatly transform what they did in person to the digital context or digital platform. So live streaming services or doing services over Zoom. And there are some rituals or forms of services that lend themselves very readily to that. And some communities have experienced that transition quite seamlessly and kind of haven't missed a beat going from in-person to digital platforms. But we were also really interested in some examples we've received that showed the way communities were struggling to simply recreate their in-person rituals online, and what those struggles might tell us about the changing nature of religious community and religious authority during this time. So one example of this that I'll share with you comes from a Wiccan community here in Central Ohio. And it's a ritual that the Wiccan community here performs called a cone of power. And why this example works so well for us is because it's a community that we had worked with prior to the COVID pandemic. Researchers from our team had gone in and recorded this ritual live in person, maybe 2 years ago or so. And then after the pandemic started, we were able to go back and recheck in with the same community to see how they were doing. And we have before and after recordings of the same ritual, which we'll share with you. The cone of power, excuse me, the cone of power is a fairly common Wiccan practice of raising energy for magical purposes, usually through chanting. So in the first recording I'm going to play for you, this is the pre-pandemic recording. It was a Wiccan group meeting in one of the members' living rooms, and they are all standing together in a circle with linked hands, forming the base of an invisible cone to the top of which energy is believed to flow. It's a very powerful communal ritual that involves the interweaving of voices that envelops all the participants together in sound. I'll just play a brief excerpt of it so you can hear what it sounds like.
The goddess is alive and the magic is afoot. The goddess is alive and the magic is afoot. The goddess is alive and the magic is afoot. The goddess is alive and the magic is afoot. The goddess is alive and the magic is afoot. The goddess is alive and the magic is afoot. The goddess is alive and the magic is afoot.
So that gives you a sense of, it's a very powerful ritual that involves, again, everyone gathered together in a circle, weaving their voices together as one or as one community. And it relies, I think, on that co-presence and the ability to produce sound together at the same time. So you can imagine anyone who spent any time over the last 10 months on Zoom, you can imagine what happens when you try to recreate that ritual on Zoom. So one of our researchers visited with this community last April, shortly after the pandemic started. And the first time the community gathered by Zoom and tried to perform the exact same ritual. And you'll hear a little bit of how that sounded.
You guys ready? Okay, so just as a practice, seasons change, but the magic still remains.
Seasons change, but the magic still remains. Seasons change, but the magic still remains. Seasons change, but the magic still remains. Seasons alive and the magic is afoot.
The goddess is alive and the magic is afoot.
I don't know if this is gonna work.
And the magic is afoot. The goddess is alive. Are you guys listening?
Yeah. Uh-oh.
Brian.
There's too much for the bandwidth.
Okay, so you're not getting it in real time then. So hit
Yeah, it's not gonna work.
Yeah, we should just hit the mute button.
Why don't we watch you guys do?
Yeah, we should mute and you can pin yourself because it keeps going with everybody.
But seriously, I do want you to have the experience of doing this out there. I get this right. You should film me reaching out to each and every one of you while we're doing this.
Which is actually the goal. I want you to have the experience of being there. Okay? Anyway, so I'm just going to go ahead and get started.
So I don't know if you could hear what gets said at the end of that clip, right? But they all decide that they're all going to mute except for the leader. And the leader says, if I do this right, you should still feel the energy flowing out. So on the one hand, it's kind of an amusing clip. We've all been in that experience of Zoom where the audio lag makes communal ritual almost impossible. And in the end, everyone has to mute themselves except for the person actually speaking. But you see how it transforms the ritual from one that is really a community doing it together to one that has a leader and everybody else doing it silently muted in their homes. And a leader says it should still work. And that's kind of the question, right? Is that as these rituals transform, do they still maintain or retain their same power or not? What is essential about the rituals that allows them to be recreated in new contexts? And what is a fundamental transformation that makes it really a different experience of community during this time?
So Isaac has shared with you an example of ritual failure, and I'd like to share with you an example of ritual adaptation. Lots of the recordings that we received were in this category. And so, some of the recordings are adaptation because of a changed context, right? So because of physical separation, there might be a ritual adaptation. Here I'm thinking about, and I'm going to give a shout out to a Cal undergraduate, Kimberly Pingator, who was in April, went to an Easter service in a parking lot in Missouri, the church parking lot. And one of the ritual adaptations they did was that instead of saying amen, because they're all separated in their own cars, they honked their horns for amen. So, small kind of ritual adaptations because of physical separation. Sometimes the content, and I'll share that with you, is changed because it's in the context of the pandemic. And so rituals are transformed to respond to that. And then sometimes there's adaptation with community. And we have a number of recordings where there are real questions of who's in charge. Is it the laity or is it the officiant? And who decides who gets to speak, who's muted and who's unmuted, and what happens when people who are used to not being in charge in a community take charge of different parts of ritual. But what I want to share with you is what I think is a really interesting and profound recording, which is of a hospital chaplain during Holy Week in the Christian calendar on Maundy, Thursday. And she is in a hospital, and she is performing a ritual for other chaplains who are going to be working with COVID-19 patients. And what she does is she takes this ritual that traditionally within many Christian communities on Maundy, Thursday, they practice a ritual of foot washing, and they do it as a way of serving each other, but also of expressing love. And she takes that ritual and she transforms it into a ritual that is about serving, but it's no longer foot washing, it's hand washing.
Hi, I'm Megan Pike. I'm one of your staff chaplains here at Blessing. And this Maundy, Thursday is different than any other Maundy, Thursday we've ever had. And we wanted to be able to bring you a blessing on this day, to be able to remember the season of the Holy Week and provide you with an opportunity just to pause, reflect, and take this time to think about the work that you're doing for our staff, our patients, our community. And so much like what's usually offered on Maundy, Thursday, a washing of the feet, we want to offer the idea of a blessing of the hands, hand washing. And so this is something that you could do in remembrance of what Jesus did in serving his disciples, the ultimate symbol of service, right? And so we want to offer the idea of you spending that 20 seconds washing your hands as a blessing of your own hands for the work that you do here each and every day. So I invite you just to pause with me as I share this blessing. Blessed are the works of your hands, hands that bring healing, hands that offer comfort and support. May the sacredness of your work bring hope and renewal to those you work with, as well as to those who receive your work. Thank you for the loving care you give to patients, families, and staff. May our Creator renew your spirit and bless you today. Amen.
Another theme we've been interested in, which has been surprising to us, has been one that we're calling ritual publicity. And what we mean by this is that so much of this time of the pandemic, as we all know, has been about turning inward, especially into the space of the home. So many of us are working from our homes instead of going to workplaces. I'm right now sitting in my house as I deliver this talk. Many of us are consumed, spending so much time dealing with children and trying to find the balance between home and work and all of these boundaries that are blurred. Many of us are not going to our physical places of worship, to churches or synagogues or mosques, because they're closed out of concern for public health, or their numbers are greatly limited. And so a lot of this time we've been thinking about the ways that we've been kind of turning inwards. But what surprised us is some of the examples we've received and we've recorded of rituals becoming actually more public during this time because of the conditions of the pandemic. And one of the best examples of this came from the Jewish high holidays this past fall, Rosh Hashanah, last September. And one of the sonic practices that is most distinctive of the Rosh Hashanah holiday is the sounding of the shofar, of a ram's horn, that is done as part of the Rosh Hashanah service. And in most Jewish congregations in the United States, the shofar blowing is part of the formal liturgy. So the community gathers together in a synagogue, and the services are very, very long on both days of Rosh Hashanah. And as part of that service, it includes a ritual blowing or sounding of the shofar that happens during the service in the sanctuary of the synagogue. This year, most synagogues in the United States did not gather for in-person services for Rosh Hashanah. Many did Zoom or live stream services instead. So communities, there are many Jews in America who only go to synagogue on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, really twice a year. And this year they weren't able to go to synagogue at all. They were separated in their homes, observing, participating in services over their computer. And for many communities, they felt that not gathering together for the shofar sounding would be such a loss that they couldn't even really fathom it. So what many communities did, including here in Columbus, and I believe they did it in East Lansing as well, they separated this year the sounding of the shofar from the main service. And the service was done via live streaming or Zoom in the morning. And then in the afternoon, here in Columbus, the way we did it was at various intersections throughout the city. People gathered in very small groups so they could be distanced and wearing masks. And they did outdoor shofar blowings that members of the community could come and gather and hear in person. And I'm not going to play the recording right now in the interest of time, but the recording we have is one example of an outdoor shofar sounding from here in Columbus. And there's just two things I want to name that's so interesting about this. One was that for this high holiday period, when Jews by and large could not gather together in the sanctuary, in the synagogue, this became a really important moment when, even if it was in small groups, they were able to gather together in physical community and see people, many of whom they hadn't seen in person, probably since March, since the pandemic had shut everything down. And by the ritual, by doing it outdoors, it allowed for a form of safe communal gathering during this time. But it also, as we know, it moved the ritual outdoors. And that also made it audible in new ways. Usually it's done inside the synagogue where it's only the Jews attending the service could hear it. But by doing it outdoor in public parks or on intersections, it also made the ritual audible to anyone who happened to pass by, Jewish or non-Jewish, and made a minority religious practice much more audible and public in American cities than it otherwise would have been. And that's something we're really interested in kind of tracking as the years go on too. Will this be kind of a one-time innovation, or will we see this lasting beyond the time of the pandemic as something that becomes part of American Jewish ritual life?
And here in East Lansing, that of course happened on the MSU campus on the banks of the Red Cedar. The other thing we want to share with you, one other theme that has surfaced with a lot of the submissions is something that we've been thinking a lot about and curious also to see how this might change religious life. And that is a theme of inclusion. So sometimes when we were thinking over the past 10 months about everything that we lose during the quarantine or the shutdown, or all the ways in which we lose religious community, or to go to the places that we love to go to, or to do the things we want to do, and particularly within religious groups and religious communities, we're thinking a lot about at loss and adaptation. But there's another side to the story that's been coming through, and that is that with the move to online religious gatherings, and particularly like streaming or workshops or even online pilgrimages, what we're seeing is that it's also providing some people opportunities that may not have had those opportunities. And so here I'm thinking about people who now maybe couldn't attend something or go into a particular space because they're not physically able to, houses of worship that have stairs, or maybe a weekend retreat that's not accessible. We're starting to see people who are doing a type of religious tourism, visiting religious sites, listening to live stream services to places that they've always wanted to go to. And it's been really interesting to listen to some of these recordings and to have people comment on, oh, I've always wanted to do this, but have never been able to. But one recording that stands out to us particularly, which we aren't going to play, but I'm going to discuss. This is the image that came with the recording, is a recording of a family that was a Christian family that was done last spring that participated in the ritual of communion. And so they were participating in their home while they were live streaming the service. And it's a family with 2 kids. And the recording that was submitted included all of the domestic sounds. So, you know, you've got like a cat or dog meow. There's some kind of pet going. I can't remember what it is. You can hear them sort of shuffling around and kind of talking. One of the kids is just kind of figured out the symbolism of the bread and the wine and is declaring that it's disgusting and, you know, having some commentary about that. And the other child who is recorded is autistic and he is vocalizing throughout. And the person who submitted this recording, the mom, said that she did it because it was the first time that she felt like her family could authentically participate in the central ritual and be comfortable. And so, you know, as we're thinking about some losses, we also, I think it's a time to think about, well, what is gained? That there are opportunities for families to participate in rituals where maybe they don't feel welcome or they don't feel comfortable in the shared space. And that's something that, that might be a place to move forward for a lot of religious communities when people come back in, hopefully, when communities can meet in person, that some of these experiences might inform the way that these rituals happen in community moving forward. So the final theme is the theme of inclusion, and it's the theme of how will the sounds that we're hearing that are enabling more inclusion, how will that affect religious practice and religious communities once this pandemic is over?
So it's been really exciting for us to have this infrastructure in place that's allowed us in real time to map changes to American religious life as they are happening. And as we've said, we want to conclude by reminding you that this is a project that is very much still ongoing and invite you to join us in it. This is a project that invites your participation by visiting our website, by exploring our archive, and by submitting your sounds. The COVID pandemic call is open, is on our website. And we invite you to think about the ways that you have experienced changes during this time yourselves. And please join us in this work.
And we're happy to take your questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor DeGratis and Professor Weiner. Your work is amazing and it's super interesting. So one of the first questions is, what kinds of long-lasting effects do you think the COVID-19 pandemic will have on the practice of religion in Michigan and the United States as a whole?
You want to take that? You want me?
So I'll say for myself that, you know, one thing is as both of us trained as historians, we're always cautioned never to try to predict the future, right? Historians, it's not what we're good at. So I think I'll frame it instead as we are really interested to see what that looks like. I think what I'm seeing right now is communities that are engaged in really complicated processes of tremendous innovation and creativity as they are forced to think about what is really essential to their religious lives and ritual lives and what is less essential. And I think that what we will see as we come out of this pandemic across all aspects of our life, not just our religious lives, right, is not simply a return to how things were, but I think this moment has occasioned a rethinking of what it means really to gather in community and what aspects of ritual life really are necessary to be together physically in person, and what are the opportunities that are opened up by being able to reimagine what it means to be in community. So I think we'll continue to see innovation and creativity going forward, because that's really the story of American religion writ large. The story of American religious history has been one of, I think, of continual innovation and creativity.
Thank you for your answer. Another question we have received is, how many different Christian churches have you encountered that are successfully doing a virtual Holy Communion, and how exactly have they been able to do this?
So we're really bounded by the submissions that are given to us. So the short answer here is that we've received a number of recordings that are a full worship service that involve communion. Most of them are Protestant, but I think that the question here is going to be about who has the authority to serve communion and who has the sort of right to take it. And so when those boundaries are lower, and that tends to be the case with some Protestant denominations, it's much easier to do something like I talked about with the inclusion slide, that the idea there is that communion is open, and that people, including lay people, can serve communion, and that's okay. Other Christian traditions, the boundaries for that get a little bit higher. But what we're hearing is very much bound by the people who choose to submit to our archive.
Thank you. Okay, another question that was submitted is, have you received any recordings of Gregorian Chants? And it mentions a monastery in Three Rivers, Michigan called St. Gregory.
So
thank you for that question.
We've actually done recording at St. Gregory Monastery. One of our staff members has spent some time there, and she has done really beautiful, remarkably beautiful photography as well as audio recording. And what's so wonderful about that example is that it's included recordings both of chanting and also of silence. And it's something that we've thought a lot about in our project, of how we document silence as a spiritual practice. And we actually do have recordings of silence alongside recordings of chanting up on the website, including one specifically from that monastery. So it's such a wonderful question. Thank you for bringing it to our attention.
Yes, thank you for your answer. Just give me 1 second. So I know you mentioned religious sounds. Are there any other examples you can provide of religious silences that you have encountered and recorded?
So we have some examples of some meditation practices that are silent, but of course, it's never totally silent. It's in the context of silence, but you can always hear bodies, and maybe if it's outside, you can hear chirping or the wind or people breathing or ambient sounds around. So we do have some silent meditation. We have some silent prayer, and we have at least one recording outside that is, a silent group activity.
I would also, I think, add to that, something we've thought a lot about in this project is also how to think about a specific kind of silence in our archive, which is the silence of certain groups who, for very good reasons, don't want to have their practices recorded, preserved, shared publicly in this way. That includes certain kinds of Native American traditions. It includes other groups who would prefer not, for all sorts of understandable reasons, prefer not to have their practices documented and shared in this way. And we've been trying to think of how do we document those kinds of absences, where we respect a community's right, of course, not to be included, but we also don't want to suggest that by not including them somehow they don't count or they're not here too. And so we want to think about how to document those kinds of silences as well.
Thank you. One other question that we have received is, what are some of your most memorable experiences that you've had in the field? And do you have any favorite recordings from the work that you've done?
So many memorable experiences. I want to start with a favorite recording that came from COVID, that the COVID record submissions that I just think is really wonderful, and can't wait to share this recording eventually with everyone. But it's a recording that was submitted by a woman living, I believe, on the Upper West Side of New York City during the shutdown. And in this recording, she was participating in an online Buddhist meditation. And it happened to be at 7 o'clock at night, and she had her windows open. And so the recording is you can hear what's going on the live stream. You can hear her chanting, and at the same time, you can hear the people on her street clapping and doing pots and pans and all kinds of congratulatories, whoops and whoops for healthcare workers and first responders. And it's a wonderful recording because it brings together so much, and then it's very, very, very specific to the moment in which it happened. And so that's one of my favorite recordings.
I'm going to think about maybe memorable experience out in the field pre-COVID, which is I've thinking about a day that I spent with a racetrack chaplain about probably 4 or 5, maybe 5 years ago at this point. I visited a place called the Shady Bowl Speedway here in Ohio, which is a quarter-mile racetrack where they race. They call it the fastest quarter mile in the Midwest or in America or something. And there's this man there named Kermit Wilson, who is a volunteer chaplain. And every Saturday night and Sunday when they do races, he goes to the speedway, and first he walks around the pits with the drivers and the crew teams, and he prays with them before the race. And then during the race, and then right before the race, he offers a benediction. And then during the races, he walks around the stands and he talks with people and visits people. And he's there every week at the races. And I spent an afternoon just walking with him, trailing him, talking with him, interviewing him, recording. And part of why it's memorable for me is, I'll admit, it was my very first time attending a live racetrack. And I was not quite prepared for not just how loud it was, how loud the cars were, but how you feel the vibrations of the loudness in your body. As we walked around, I literally just kind of felt in my body the vibrations of all the cars as they rushed past us. And the recordings I produced throughout the day have kind of this mixture, this blending of the sounds of the racetrack, of the loudspeakers and the crowds and the vibration of the cars that you can feel, as well as his ministering and his praying and his talking to people and hanging out with them, and he knows everyone and they're chatting, and some of it's about God and some of it's nothing to do with God or religion. And it just kind of captured, not only was this memorable for me to be there, but it's kind of captured for me one of the things that I think we've tried to document through our recordings, which is the way that religion is so often not something separate and discrete from social life, but deeply embedded in it. So all of those sounds blended together, the sounds of entertainment and capitalism and sports and religion and God and sociality and family and all of that kind of brought together through the sound that came together in that recording.
Thank you so much. And then our final question before we wrap up, what do you think your students have learned by participating in this research project with you?
Well, what I hope they've learned is that they are part of a wider community that is bigger than the university, and that they are so privileged to have the opportunity to be studying at a place like Ohio State or a place like Michigan State, and that it's really important for them to get to know the communities around them, and that there's a responsibility there to be part of the community in which you live. So I'm hoping that's the first thing that they learn. The other thing I hope they're learning is that religion is bigger than maybe what we often talk about in the classrooms, and that they don't have to travel across the world. They don't have to go to a a unique space. They can just walk across campus and they can start to think about what they've learned in the classroom and start to use that knowledge to understand the people around them. So I'm hoping that that's what they learn. I mean, they end up teaching us so much that I'm hoping that it evens out, that that they learn as much from this experience as we learn from them.
Well, thank you both so much. I have been keeping an eye on the time, and it looks like it is almost 4 o'clock. And with that being said, I would just like to give a final thank you to both of you for speaking today. I very much enjoyed learning about your research regarding the sounds of religion and all of the great work that you've done. I would also like to thank our attendees for taking the time out of their day to watch, and it means a lot to have so many of our alumni that care about the work and research that is being done here in the College of Arts and Letters at MSU. And I hope you all have a great rest of the week, and go green.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having us.